What does it really mean to be eccentric when you're already the most famous person on the planet? It's not just strange clothes or wild quotes. It's the raw courage to look at every rule society hands you about gender, race, religion, success, even what adulthood is supposed to look like, and decide those rules don't apply. Tonight, we're counting down the 5 music legends who didn't just bend those rules, they shattered them, rebuilt the pieces into something unrecognizable, and somehow convinced the entire world to dance inside their new reality. Madonna turned Catholic guilt into lingerie armor. Ye weaponized his own breakdowns into cultural earthquakes. Prince made androgyny feel like destiny. David Bowie convinced us he actually fell to earth. And Michael Jackson, well, he built an actual amusement park so he could stay a child forever, while the rest of us watched in awe and unease. Welcome to Behind the Lights. We ranked them by how profoundly their strangeness reshaped music, fashion, identity, and public conversation. From 5 to 1, here we go. Starting with the woman who taught an entire generation that provocation could be power. Top 5 Madonna. We begin our countdown with the woman who turned the simple act of being looked at into a cultural revolution. Madonna Louise Ciccone arrived in New York City in 1978 with $35 and a duffel bag. And by the time she left the decade behind, she had rewritten the rulebook on what a female pop star was allowed to say, wear, and demand. Her first real statement came on the stage of the inaugural MTV Video Music Awards in 1984. Dressed as a bride, she rolled around on the floor in a white wedding dress, lost a shoe, and let the world see far more lace than network television was ready for. That single moment didn't just launch a career. It announced that Madonna was going to treat every camera lens like a battlefield, and modesty was never going to be her weapon. 6 years later, the Blonde Ambition World Tour took that declaration global. Jean-Paul Gaultier's pink satin cone bra became the most famous undergarment in history. Not because it was revealing, but because it was defiant. While she simulated masturbation to Like a Virgin Beneath a Pair of Beds, thousands of teenage girls in the audience realized for the first time that female desire didn't have to be whispered. It could be choreographed, lit like Broadway, and performed in front of 60,000 people without apology. Then came the religious imagery, used with the precision of a surgeon. The 1989 Like a Prayer video opened with burning crosses and ended with Madonna kissing a black saint who comes to life. Pepsi dropped her overnight. The Vatican called for a boycott. The single still debuted at number 1 and stayed there for 3 weeks. 17 years later, on the Confessions tour, she hung herself on a mirrored crucifix wearing a crown of thorns while 2 million ticket buyers watched in arenas around the world. Critics screamed sacrilege. Others saw a commentary on fame as modern crucifixion. Either way, the conversation belonged to her. What made it eccentric rather than merely shocking was the control. Every scandal was storyboarded, every interview calculated. When the sex book dropped in 1992, metal-covered, filled with explicit photographs of Madonna in every imaginable scenario, it wasn't a meltdown. It was a $70 limited edition art object that sold 1.5 million copies and forced bookstores to wrap it in plastic. She knew exactly how far to push, and she timed the outrage to the week her erotica album needed attention. Even her reinventions felt like performance art. The breathless Marilyn Monroe blonde of the early 80s gave way to the Kabbalah red-string mystic of Ray of Light, then the disco cowgirl of music, the hung-up-on Guy Ritchie aristocrat of American life, and finally, the unfiltered 60-something who posts bedroom selfies in lace and fishnets, because she refuses to disappear. At the 2025 Met Gala, 66 years old, she walked the carpet in an ivory Tom Ford menswear suit, cheeks full, hair slicked back, puffing a cigar alongside Heider Ackerman. The message was unmistakable, I decide, when the story ends. Madonna's real genius was understanding that provocation without purpose is just noise. She used every gasp to talk about female autonomy, the hypocrisy of organized religion, the terror of aging in public, the cone bra, the crucifix, the sex book. They weren't stunts. They were arguments delivered in the only language a mass audience couldn't ignore. She once told Rolling Stone, "I'm tough, I'm ambitious, and I know exactly what I want. If that makes me a bitch." Okay. That quote is now 35 years old, and it still feels like the mission statement of an entire generation of women who grew up watching her refuse to play small. So when we place Madonna at number 5, it's not because her strangeness was the loudest, it's because hers was the most disciplined. She proved that eccentricity could be strategic, that rebellion could be a brand, and that a woman could stay in absolute control of her narrative for 4 straight decades. From a calculated queen who weaponized every headline to a visionary who sometimes seems to set the headlines on fire just to watch them burn. Our number 4 takes unpredictability to a completely different level. Top 4, Kanye West. If Madonna's eccentricity is a scalpel precise, cold, always aimed at the exact nerve she wants to hit, then Ye's is a wildfire. You never know where it's going next, how big it will get, or what it will leave behind. Kanye Omari West burst out of Chicago as the backpack rap producer with a pink polo and a chip on his shoulder. But by the time The College Dropout dropped in 2004, the world could already sense this was someone who didn't just want success. He wanted to rewrite the definition of it. The first real warning came in 2009. A 19-year-old Taylor Swift is halfway through her VMA acceptance speech when a figure in a black suit vaults onto the stage, grabs the microphone, and declares that Beyoncé had one of the best videos of all time. The room freezes. Barack Obama, off camera, reportedly calls him a jackass. And just like that, the template is set. You will interrupt anything award shows, timelines, cultural conversations if he believes the truth is being ignored. Fashion became his second language, and he spoke it in screams. Yeezy Season 1 in 2015 looked like refugees from a beautiful apocalypse muslin tunics, flesh-toned pantyhose, no logos. He told the crowd he wanted to dress the world, not just the rich. 7 years later, at Paris Fashion Week 2022, he walked the runway wearing a shirt that read "White Lives Matter" in block letters. Candace Owens at his side. Vogue editor Gabriella Carafa Johnson called the message irresponsible and dangerous. Ye responded by posting photos of her shoes on Instagram, mocking them for hours. Adidas, a partner that had made him a billionaire, ended the relationship days later. The fallout cost him roughly $2 billion on paper and turned the word Yeezy radioactive in corporate boardrooms overnight. The provocations kept escalating. In 2018, he sat in the Oval Office across from Donald Trump wearing the red MAGA hat, telling the cameras he felt like Superman. In 2020, he launched a presidential campaign, cried on stage about almost aborting his daughter North, and ended the night with 6% of the vote in a handful of states. In late 2022, he went on Alex Jones's InfoWars and said he liked Hitler, that the Nazis did some good things, and that Jewish people controlled the media. Accounts were frozen, partnerships dissolved, stadiums canceled tours before they were even announced. Yet in 2025, he bought a Super Bowl ad, filmed it from a dentist's chair while half sedated, and used the 30 seconds to direct viewers to a website selling shirts with swastikas on them. Shopify shut the site down within hours. His music has always been the one place where the chaos finds rhythm. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is still considered one of the greatest albums ever recorded, a paranoid orchestral confession booth. Yeezus sounded like the end of the world filtered through a broken synthesizer. The Donda and Vulture's listening events were staged like religious revivals, thousands in the middle of football stadiums, Ye floating above the crowd on a platform, sometimes masked, sometimes crying, sometimes setting himself on fire. Even when the lyrics became unlistenable to mainstream radio, the events sold out instantly. People close to him have spoken openly about his bipolar diagnosis, about hospitalizations, about the terror of watching someone you love believe the entire world is conspiring against them. Ye himself has said the condition is his superpower, that without it, there would be no genius. The line between the two has become impossible for the public to draw. At 47, he walks runways in Berlin wearing all black, no longer invited to the Met Gala, no longer welcome on most streaming playlists, yet still capable of moving culture with a single post. He calls it a vendetta now against the industry, against the gatekeepers, against anyone who ever doubted him. Ye's eccentricity isn't strategy the way Madonna's is. It's oxygen. Remove the confrontation, the contradiction, the constant reinvention of enemy and ally, and the engine stops. Whether that engine is powering art or destruction often depends on the day you ask. He once rapped, "I'm the only thing I'm afraid of." 20 years later, the rest of us are still trying to figure out what that means. From a man who sets the world on fire to stay warm, we move to a man who wrapped the world in purple velvet and made mystery itself feel sensual. Number 3 is coming up. Top 3 Prince, where Madonna calculated every gasp and Ye detonated without warning. Prince simply existed on a different frequency. Prince Rogers Nelson was 5'2", spoke in a soft whisper off stage, and somehow commanded stadiums like a high priest of sex and sound. From the moment he stepped out of Minneapolis in the late 70s, he made the world question everything it thought it knew about masculinity, race, and artistic ownership. The first thing that hit you was the way he looked. In 1980, he posed for the cover of Dirty Mind, wearing nothing but a thong, a studded trench coat, and a stare that dared you to call it a joke. A year later, he was opening for the Rolling Stones in Los Angeles, dressed in lace leggings and heels, getting pelted with chicken bones while the crowd booed. He never flinched. On the Controversy Tour, he sang "Do Me," baby lying on a bed under red lights, hips rolling in slow motion, while the lyric sheet asked, "Am I black or white? Am I straight or gay?" Long before the words gender fluid entered everyday conversation, Prince was living them. The Purple Rain era softened the edges just enough for the mainstream to fall in love ruffled shirts, curled hair, eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. But the sensuality never diluted. It just got a better soundtrack. Then, in 1993, he did something no one else has ever pulled off. Frustrated that Warner Brothers wouldn't let him release music as fast as he was creating it, he killed his own name. Overnight, Prince became an unpronounceable symbol. Part Mars, part Venus, part Christian cross, and the world had to call him the artist. Formerly known as Prince, reporters stumbled over it. Record stores put up blank stickers. He showed up to the Brit Awards with the word "slave" scrawled across his cheek in eyeliner. It wasn't a meltdown. It was the most expensive performance art protest in music history. Between 1994 and 2000, he flooded the market with albums, EPs, and triple disc sets, daring the industry to keep up. When the contract finally expired, he celebrated by writing the word Prince back on his face in the mirror and smiling like a man who had just won a war nobody else even understood was being fought. Privacy was sacred. He turned his compound outside Minneapolis into a fortress called Paisley Park Recording Studios, sound stages, a nightclub, and a vault rumored to hold thousands of unreleased songs. Friends who visited said the hallways smelled like lavender and candle wax, that he cooked vegetarian lasagna at 3 a.m. and played basketball in stacked heels. In 2001, he became a Jehovah's Witness, quietly going door to door in a Minneapolis suburb wearing a disguise. Albums after that carried parental advisory stickers he personally removed from certain pressings. The contradiction was the point he could be the most explicit performer alive on Friday night and hand you a Watchtower pamphlet on Saturday morning. When he died in 2016 from an accidental fentanyl overdose, the shock wasn't just the loss of a genius, it was the sudden realization that no one had ever really known him. No public funeral, no will, just a vault door that still hasn't fully opened. 9 years later, the estate battles rage on siblings suing advisors, former collaborators fighting over trademarks, a 9-hour documentary shelved because it reportedly painted too human a portrait. Yet every year, another deluxe edition arrives, sign of the color, diamonds and pearls, now the long-promised Purple Rain box, each one sounding like it was recorded yesterday. Prince never explained the heels, the symbol, the midnight rules about no eye contact in the hallway. He didn't have to. His eccentricity wasn't about getting attention. It was about protecting the space where the music could stay pure. He showed an entire generation that you could be flamboyant and ferocious, vulnerable and in total control, sacred and profane, all at the same time. He left us with one line that feels like the quietest manifesto ever whispered into a microphone. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. For Prince, getting through it meant never letting anyone else write the script. From a man who made mystery feel sensual, we move to the artist who made mystery feel cosmic. Number 2 changed his skin, his sound, and his species more times than most of us change our minds. Top 2, David Bowie. If Prince wrapped mystery around sensuality, David Bowie wrapped it around the entire human experience and then mailed it back to us from another planet. Born David Jones in a quiet South London suburb in 1947, he spent the first 25 years of his life trying on identities the way other people try on coats. Until one day he realized the coat could become the man. The turning point came in 1972. A modest folkie with a handful of flops walked onto the stage of Top of the Pops with spiky orange hair, a quilted jumpsuit, and a 12-string acoustic. He draped an arm around guitarist Mick Ronson, looked straight down the camera lens, and sang, "I had to phone someone, so I picked on you." Britain froze. Teenage boys went to school the next day with one earring and eyeliner borrowed from their sisters. Overnight, David Jones was gone. Ziggy Stardust had landed. Ziggy wasn't a costume change. He was a full-scale invasion. Metallic fabrics designed by Kansai Yamamoto. Platform boots that turned every step into theater. Lyrics about a bisexual alien rock star who saves the world and then lets it burn. Bowie later explained that he built Ziggy to be destroyed. On July 3, 1973, at the Hammersmith Odeon, he told a stunned crowd, "This show will stay the longest in our memories, not just because it is the last show of the tour, but because it is the last show we'll ever do. The band kept playing while the audience realized their Messiah had just committed ritual suicide on stage. He was 26 years old and already bored. He never stopped killing and resurrecting himself. After Ziggy came Aladdin Sane, the lightning bolt painted across his face like a crack in reality. Then the Thin White Duke, a hollow-eyed, black-and-white cabaret dictator who scared even Bowie himself. By 1976, he was so deep into cocaine that he reportedly kept his urine in the fridge and claimed he was living on red peppers and milk. He fled to West Berlin, rented an apartment above an auto repair shop, and with Brian Eno made 3 albums low, Heroes, and Lodger that sounded like the inside of a beautiful breakdown. The wall outside his window became the wall inside the music. Every persona asked a different question. Ziggy asked, "What if rock stars really were gods?" The Duke asked, "What happens when the mask starts eating the man the Goblin King in Labyrinth asked? What if the monster is just lonely?" And in 1986, when he juggled crystal balls and sang Magic Dance in a fright wig and tights, millions of kids who had no idea who Ziggy was still fell in love with the strangeness. Bowie understood that eccentricity without ideas is just noise. He read Orwell and Burroughs, studied mime with Lindsay Kemp, designed his own album covers, and in 1997 became the first musician to securitize his catalog with Bowie bonds, turning future royalties into a 10-year, $55 million loan against himself. Even his business moves felt like science fiction. When he learned he had cancer in 2014, he kept it secret from almost everyone. His final album, Black Star, released 2 days before he died in January 2016, is a jazz-infused farewell letter full of calls, blindfolds, and a character begging to be released into the sky. The last music video he ever appeared in shows him blindfolded, buttons sewn over his eyes, dancing backward into darkness. He planned every frame. 9 years later, the V&A Museum in London opened a permanent David Bowie Center filled with his notebooks, costumes, and handwritten lyrics. The waiting list for tickets is months long. His estate is now valued north of $300 million, quietly managed by the trusts he set up decades ago. He left the stage the same way he entered it on his own terms, from a place no one else could reach. Bowie's genius was never the shock itself. It was the invitation. He made strangeness feel like a doorway instead of a wall. He let generations of outsiders, queer kids, shy kids, kids who felt like aliens look at him and think, maybe I don't have to hide the parts that don't fit. From a man who spent 50 years proving you could change your skin and still be loved, we arrive at the one artist who changed his skin so completely the world is still arguing about what we actually saw. Number 1 built an entire kingdom so he could stay a child forever, and in doing so became the most heartbreaking enigma of them all. Top 1 Michael Jackson. And now we reach the top of the mountain, the one artist whose strangeness didn't just challenge the world, it created its own gravity. Michael Joseph Jackson was 5 years old when he first stepped onto a stage in Gary, Indiana, singing with a voice that sounded like it had already lived 100 lives. By the time he was 30, he had sold more records than anyone who had ever lived. And by the time he was 50, he had become the most famous human being on Earth, living in a place no camera was ever fully allowed to see. The first thing people noticed, and never stopped noticing, was the way he changed. The little boy with the giant afro on The Ed Sullivan Show slowly became someone else. The skin lightened vitiligo and makeup. He explained on Oprah in 1993 in the most watched television interview in history. The nose narrowed. The cheekbones rose. The chin cleft appeared. Each alteration was small on its own, but together they turned the most recognizable face on the planet into something almost porcelain. He wore surgical masks in public, huge sunglasses, military jackets dripping with gold braid, and a single sequined glove that somehow made sense only on him. The tabloids called him Wacko Jacko. He called the glove magic. Then there was Neverland. In 1988, he bought a sprawling ranch in Santa Barbara County and spent a reported $100 million turning it into a permanent childhood. A private zoo with giraffes and elephants, a train that circled the property, Ferris wheels, bumper cars, an arcade where the games were always set to free play. He told Martin Bashir in 2003, eyes shining, "This is what the world should be." He slept in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, tried to buy the bones of the Elephant Man, invited hundreds of children to sleep over because, he said, "I am Peter Pan." The innocence felt genuine, and that made what came later feel unbearable. The allegations began in 1993. A 13-year-old boy said Michael had molested him. The police investigation was exhaustive. The settlement was $23 million, and Jackson always insisted he was innocent, paying only to protect his children from a trial. 12 years later, after another boy and another trial, a Santa Maria jury acquitted him on every count. He left the courthouse, stood on top of an SUV, and waved like a man who believed the nightmare was finally over. Within 4 years, he was gone, dead at 50 from an overdose of propofol administered by a doctor who thought he was helping the king of pop sleep. The contradictions never resolved. He broke racial barriers on MTV with Thriller, then vamped in a skin tone the world refused to understand. He revolutionized dance with moves that looked impossible, the moonwalk, the anti-gravity lean, then retreated into a fantasy world that looked impossible. He sang We Are the World with tears in his eyes and raised $60 million for famine relief, then spent nights alone in a mansion full of mannequins dressed as children. 15 years after his death, the estate he left behind, once $500 million in debt, is now worth more than $2 billion, fueled by a Broadway show, Cirque du Soleil spectacles, and the biggest catalog sale in history. Yet the arguments still rage. Leaving Neverland in 2019 gave voice to 2 men who say they were groomed and abused for years. The estate calls the film a one-sided character assassination. Fans flood comment sections with moon emojis and accusations of greed. A biopic starring his nephew Jafar is scheduled for 2026, and no one can agree on what version of Michael the screen should show. What made Michael Jackson the most eccentric of them all wasn't the glove, the ranch, or even the changing face. It was the way he seemed to live inside a story only he could see. Part lost boy, part global savior, part haunted king. The rest of us watched from the outside, desperate to understand, terrified we never would. He once said, "If you enter this world knowing you are loved, and you leave this world knowing the same, then everything that happens in between can be dealt with." For Michael Jackson, everything in between was the greatest show on earth, and the loneliest. That's our 5 artists who refused the ordinary and paid for it with pieces of themselves we'll never fully recover. Now it's your turn. Who sits at number 1 in your book? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories about the icons who lit up the dark, hit subscribe. We'll see you behind the lights. We started with a simple question: what happens when someone refuses to live inside the lines the rest of us agreed on? Tonight we met 5 answers. Madonna showed us rebellion can be a masterpiece if you never blink first. Ye reminded us that genius and wreckage can share the same heartbeat. Prince proved, mystery doesn't need an explanation to feel like home. Bowie taught us that changing your skin is the bravest way to find out who you really are. And Michael built an entire world so he could stay the child the spotlight first fell in love with, and in doing so became the loneliest king any of us will ever know. 5 different flavors of strange. One common truth. The moments that made them unforgettable are the same moments that made them untouchable. And maybe that's the quiet bargain every true original signs you get to change everything, but you never quite get to come all the way back. So here's what I keep wondering, if any of them had played it safe. Would we still be talking about them decades later, or does the fire that lights up the world always have to burn the hand that carries it? That's the conversation I hope this video starts for you. Drop your own ranking in the comments. Who's your number 1? And why? Hit the bell if you want more stories about the beautiful, complicated souls who refuse to dim. Thank you for spending this time with us. Behind the lights. See you in the next one. Stay curious.